1, 2, 3.
Maybe this movie carried a curse right in its name because the more you look back at the people in it, the word blue starts to feel like a warning. The one who shined the brightest ended up falling the hardest, drowning in addiction and dying of an overdose at just 33. But that's only the first cut. One guy climbed up from a poor childhood, went into a reform school at 15, then years later was still getting pulled into guns, car chases, and prison time. Another went completely blind at 7, lost his mother at 15, then struggled with heroin for nearly 2 decades before getting out. Behind the music, the black suits, and that immortal cool of the Blues Brothers is a long line of lives worn down by addiction, illness, loss, and sudden crashes no one saw coming. Are you ready to dive into the lives of these legendary faces yet? Number 1, John Belushi as Joliet Jake Blues. How can we not talk about John Belushi, the guy who practically set this whole movie on fire showing up? When the Blues Brothers came out in 1980, Belushi was 31, stepping into Joliet Jake Blues at a time when all of America already knew him as a Saturday night live star, the guy who blew up Animal House as Bluto, and the Blues Brothers brand itself had already gone huge with the album Briefcase Full of Blues hitting number 1 on Billboard. Plain and simple Jake Blues showed up right when Belushi was at the peak of his popularity. But that same stretch of life is when the tragedy hit. He married Judy Jacklin in 1976, the woman who'd been with him since high school, but by the time they were filming the Blues Brothers, cocaine had become a shadow glued to him. Production dragged on because the nights where Belushi wandered around Chicago showed up late or crashed in his trailer trying to recover from nonstop partying. Then it got to the point where even John Landis had to face reality. He walked into the trailer and saw a mountain of cocaine on the table. The conversation that followed wasn't just a director scolding an actor anymore. Belushi let out his real fear that one day that stuff was going to kill him. Aykroyd and Judy tried to pull him back. The movie still got finished. The movie still became a hit. But anyone paying attention could see the price getting close. And then the thing Belushi feared most actually happened. In March 1982, while still working on the Noble Rot project, he died of an overdose in a rented bungalow in Los Angeles at just 33. Later, Kathy Smith admitted she injected him with a mix of heroin and cocaine. Belushi didn't fall like some distant star. He left behind Judy the wife, who'd been there since before the fame, and Dan Aykroyd, who later said having to tell Judy the news was a trauma he carried for the rest of his life. Later on, the Blues Brothers became a true cult film and then got added to the National Film Registry in 2020. If he were still alive, John Belushi would be 77 this year. But the truth is, the audience never got the chance to watch him grow old. Belushi is frozen forever at 33, right at that moment where glory and self-destruction collided the hardest. And maybe that's why people still can't stop talking about him. John Belushi left way too early, but some people only need that much time to become legends. Number 2, Dan Aykroyd as Elwood Blues. When the Blues Brothers came out in 1980, he was 28 already, one of the founding faces of Saturday Night Live, and more importantly, he didn't just play Elwood Blues. He co-created the character, co-wrote the script, and carried the whole brand from stage to records and then into film. Aykroyd studied sociology and criminology at Carleton before dropping out to do comedy. Aykroyd once said he had pretty severe Tourette's from the age of 12, with noticeable tics later understood as a mix of Tourette's and Asperger's. In other words, this is a man who grew up feeling different, then learned how to turn those obsessions into creative fuel. There's a small scratch in his life, a marijuana possession arrest in Illinois, but it doesn't define him. What matters more is that during the Blues Brothers era, his personal life got tangled up with the film through his relationship with Carrie Fisher, who was briefly his fiancée. But the event that really cut deep into Dan Aykroyd's life was John Belushi's death. In 1982, Aykroyd was the one who had to tell Judy Belushi that her husband had died. He said it was a trauma that would stay with him forever, and it took him nearly a full year to recover. Aykroyd didn't just lose a co-star, he lost his most important creative partner, the other half of a duo people thought would keep going forever. Some losses don't knock a man down in front of you. They just sit there deep inside him and stay with him for life. After everything, Aykroyd didn't leave Elwood behind. He married Donna Dixon in 1983, had 3 daughters, and by 2022 they separated after 39 years, but stayed friends, still co-parenting, still working together, and still legally married. As for the Blues Brothers, he carried that legacy forward through Jim Belushi House of Blues, Blues Brothers 2000, and even the audio documentary Blues Brothers, The Arc of Gratitude in 2024. Born in 1952, Dan Aykroyd is 74 this year, and he says he still has to manage 2 big offices, Blues Brothers and Ghostbusters, but what he wants most now is to live for his kids. Number 3, Cab Calloway as Curtis. When the Blues Brothers came out in 1980, Cab Calloway was before stepping into Curtis, he was a legend from the Cotton Club days, tied forever to Minnie the Moocher since 1931, and one of the biggest names of the swing era. In the film, Curtis runs the orphanage, reminds Jake and Elwood that time is running out, and helps push them back onto the right path. But what gives this role weight isn't screen time. It's the moment Cab Calloway steps on stage and sings Minnie the Moocher, the song that made him famous nearly half a century earlier. But Cab Calloway's life wasn't just glory. He came up in a time when black artists could be celebrated on stage but still had to live inside a system full of racial barriers. Then in 1948, his band broke up as the big band era ended. That was a huge blow, the kind that makes a lot of people disappear. Cab didn't. He came back with Porgy and Bess in 1952, then went on to live another life on Broadway. That's what I really respect about people like Calloway. They don't chase the times, they live long enough to pass right through them. And then the Blues Brothers did something cinema sometimes does beautifully. It brought Cab Calloway back to a younger audience, people who may never have lived through the Cotton Club era, but could instantly recognize his authority. In 1993, he was awarded the National Medal of Arts. Just 1 year later, in June 1994, he suffered a severe stroke and passed away that November from pneumonia complications at 86. Number 4, Carrie Fisher as Mystery Woman. Then there's Carrie Fisher.
Jake,
and with her, what people remember isn't just the mystery woman in the Blues Brothers. It's that feeling of her stepping into the film at 24, already a nationwide name, while underneath that spotlight, her personal life was starting to crack in ways that don't heal easily. In the movie, she plays a mysterious woman constantly chasing Jake and Elwood, later revealed as the fiancée Jake left at the altar. When the Blues Brothers came out in 1980, she was already Princess Leia from Star Wars, and that same year, The Empire Strikes Back hit theaters. Before this movie, she had even hosted Saturday Night Live in an episode where the Blues Brothers were the musical guest. But Carrie Fisher's story isn't the smooth kind Hollywood likes to sell. It's bright but messy. During the Blues Brothers era, she and Dan Aykroyd were together, even briefly engaged. That made this role tied directly to her real life, not just something on screen. At the same time, pressure, addiction, and mental struggles were starting to show. Carrie later openly said she smoked marijuana at 13, used LSD before 21, and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at exactly 24, right around to the Blues Brothers period. She went through medication, electroshock therapy, and spent years in a cycle where outsiders only saw the results, rarely the cost. For someone else, that might have been enough to destroy a career. Carrie Fisher chose a harder but braver path. She didn't hide any of it. She brought it into the light, turned it into words, into a voice, into perspective. Postcards from the Edge in 1987 wasn't just a successful book. It proved she understood exactly where she was breaking and was sharp enough to turn that break into art. The final chapter of her life carried that same intensity. In December 2016, she suffered a medical emergency on a flight from London to Los Angeles and died 4 days later at 60. The coroner later listed sleep apnea and multiple contributing factors, signs of various substances in her system. But the official cause of death was undetermined. In other words, her death was just like her life. Not clean, not simple, not something you can wrap up in one sentence. And then just 1 day later, Debbie Reynolds passed away too. Number 5, John Candy as Burton Mercer. Then there's John Candy. This is a name that always feels both warm and painful to me. In The Blues Brothers, he plays Burton Mercer, the officer chasing Jake and Elwood throughout the film. When it came out in 1980, Candy was 30, coming up from the Second City and SCTV, right on the edge of breaking into Hollywood, but not yet the major comedy star he'd become a few years later. What makes his story sad isn't loud scandal. John Candy wasn't that kind of person. The weight comes from the fact that he made people laugh, while inside he spent years dealing with anxiety and panic. He struggled with chronic anxiety, panic attacks, plus weight issues and long-term heart concerns. It hits even harder knowing that tragedy touched him early. His father died of heart disease when Candy was young, and that shadow never really left him. He married Rosemary Hobor in 1979, had 2 kids, and from the outside it looked like a stable home, but often the kindest, most family-oriented people, the ones who make everyone else feel good, are the ones who hide their burdens the deepest. In his final years, Candy never slowed down. He even co-owned the Toronto Argonauts starting in 1991, which means he wasn't taking it easy. Then in March 1994, while filming Wagons East in Durango, Mexico, John Candy died in his sleep from a massive heart attack at 43. What makes this still hurt is that the night before he was calling friends and co-workers in a great mood after a good day of shooting. He didn't go out in scandal. He went out in the middle of work with plans unfinished at a time when audiences still needed him. If he were alive today, John Candy would be 76. But we never got to see him age into the best years of a man's life. To me, that's the real tragedy. A man who made the whole world feel lighter had to carry so much weight inside and left way too soon. Number 6, James Brown as Reverend Cleophas James. Now we get to James Brown, and with him, real life was just as intense as the stage. In The Blues Brothers, he plays Reverend Cleophas James, the preacher at Triple Rock Baptist Church, and that church scene is the turning point of the whole movie, when Jake sees the light and decides to earn money the honest way to save the orphanage. When the film came out in 1980, Brown was 47. This wasn't a man chasing fame anymore. He was already a soul and funk legend, someone whose presence alone gave a film weight. But if you only see James Brown as a stage legend, you're missing a lot. Born in 1933, he grew up poor in the American South with broken parents, and at 15, he was arrested for breaking into cars with a friend. He was sentenced to between 8 and 16 years, then released after about 3 for good behavior. It was in reform school that he formed his first gospel group. Plain and simple, James Brown didn't come from a clean path. He came out of poverty, prison, and raw survival instinct. In 1988, Brown got into a major scandal, earlier accusations involving guns and PCP. Then he stormed into a meeting in Augusta with a weapon leading to a high-speed chase across Georgia and South Carolina. He was later sentenced to 6 years, 6 months for failing to stop for police and aggravated assault, and got out after about 3. Then in 2004, he was arrested again over domestic violence allegations. CBS also noted his 1988 arrest after assaulting his 3rd wife in another drug case in 1998. James Brown died on December 25, 2006 at 73 after being hospitalized for severe pneumonia. The cause of death was congestive heart failure. What still lingers about his story is the clear contradiction: a man who repeatedly wrecked his own life yet never stopped charging back onto the stage. Number 7. Ray Charles as Ray. In The Blues Brothers, Ray Charles plays Ray, the blind music store owner who sells instruments to Jake and Elwood, then bursts in to shake a tail feather. When the movie came out in 1980, he was 50. And at that age, Ray Charles did not need this movie to be remembered anymore. He was already one of the people who helped lay the foundation for soul music with a whole lifetime of music behind him. But Ray Charles's life was never some clean straight line. He was born in 1930, started losing his sight when he was very young, went completely blind at just 7, then lost his mother at 15. That means before he ever became famous, he had already had to learn how to live with blindness, loss, and poverty. Because of that, the darkest part of Ray Charles's life did not come like some sudden fall. It came more like something that stayed attached to him for years. He was addicted to heroin, got arrested on narcotics charges in 1955, 1961, and 1965, and only really broke the addiction after 17 years agreeing to treatment and almost stopping performing for a rare stretch in his whole career. Ray Charles was married twice, had 12 children with several different women, and by late 2002, he even called his children together for a meeting to speak plainly about his illness and his estate. That was not the life of a man who lived neatly. That was the life of a genius who left scratches everywhere he went. But what matters is that Ray Charles did not let those scratches kill his music. He kept going, kept getting honored with major awards, and kept standing like a monument right up to the end. Ray Charles died in 2004 at 73 from complications of liver disease. Number 8, Kathleen Freeman as Sister Mary Stigmata. In The Blues Brothers, she plays Sister Mary Stigmata, the woman in charge of the orphanage and the shadow from childhood that Jake and Elwood can never really escape. According to major obituaries, Freeman was born in 1919, which means when the movie came out in 1980, she was 61. She was born in Chicago. The daughter of 2 vaudeville performers, started on stage as a child, then studied at UCLA, planning to pursue classical piano before turning to acting. Before the Blues Brothers, Kathleen Freeman was already a seasoned character actress, with appearances in Singin' in the Rain, and especially a whole run of movies with Jerry Lewis. In other words, she did not walk into this movie to change her life. She walked in with a long career already behind her, but Freeman's private life almost went in the opposite direction from Hollywood. Obituary sources show she never married, had no children, and said very little publicly about her private life. The thing mentioned most often was her long bond with Helen Ramsey, whom some sources called a long-time close friend, while others called her a long-time partner. With Kathleen Freeman, the clearest thing the public could see was not a private life full of upheaval, but a kind of professional endurance that is very rare. Her biggest turning point came at the end of her life. In 2001, Freeman was performing in the Full Monty on Broadway and got nominated for a Tony Award when illness forced her to leave the role. Just 5 days after her final performance, she died in New York of lung cancer. That is the part that makes Kathleen Freeman's story sad in such a quiet way. Not a loud life that crashed apart, but a woman who worked for more than half a century, lived long enough to finally be called by her full worth, and then the curtain came down almost right away. Kathleen Freeman died in 2001 at 82, and she left behind exactly the thing many great actors still dream of having: a face the audience can never forget. Number 9, Charles Napier as Tucker McElroy. In The Blues Brothers, he plays Tucker McElroy, the lead singer of the Good Old Boys. When the movie came out in 1980, Napier was 44, and by then he had already lived through all kinds of things before becoming an actor: a high school basketball star in Kentucky, a soldier starting in 1954, then an art teacher and basketball coach after finishing college. Roger Ebert laid it out very clearly by late 1974. Napier was broke, had no money, no agent, no work, was sleeping in his pickup truck in Russ Meyer's parking lot and wandering Hollywood Boulevard every day. He said flat out that he was 39 and believed this was the end of his acting career. That is a detail I really want to keep all the weight of, because not everyone can survive the feeling that almost half their life is gone and they still see themselves as a failure. Napier's private life was not exactly calm either. He went through a failed marriage, then later lived with his second wife, Dee, and the children. Then he kept going, but not in some glorious way. Super Vixen saved him. Hitchcock signed him with Universal, and from there Napier made a living as an actor for more than 40 years, mostly playing military men, cops, bosses, stubborn hard cases, or intimidating guys, but that feeling of never quite becoming a major star seemed like it never fully left him. Even his later years were quiet in that same way. In 2010, he was treated for a blood clot in his leg, then died in 2011 at 75 after collapsing at home. Number 10, Henry Gibson as Head Nazi. Then there is Henry Gibson, a face audiences remember the second they see him, but a private life that stayed almost completely closed off. In The Blues Brothers, he plays Head Nazi, the leader of the Illinois neo-fascist group, a supporting role that is not long but is very hard to forget. When the movie came out in 1980, Gibson was 45. By then, he was no newcomer. He had already become famous in the late 1960s through Rowan and Martin's Laugh In, where his deadpan poet persona holding a flower made him a very distinctive television face. Even before that, his life had not followed the usual artist path. He studied drama at Catholic University, served in the United States Air Force in intelligence work in France, then went to London to continue studying at RADA before fully stepping into the profession. Henry Gibson was much more private and calm than a lot of other people on this list. He married Lois Joan Geiger in 1966, stayed with her for more than 40 years, and had 3 sons. That is exactly what makes his story sad in a different way. In 2007, Lois died after a long illness. 2 years later, Henry Gibson died at his home in Malibu after a short battle with cancer at 73, just 1 week before his 74th birthday. Number 11, Aretha Franklin as Mrs. Murphy. With Aretha Franklin, the spotlight and the wounds were almost side by side her whole life. In The Blues Brothers, she plays Mrs. Murphy and sings Think in a short scene that almost swallows the whole movie. When the movie came out in 1980, Aretha was 38. And at that age, she did not need this movie to be recognized anymore. She was already the queen of soul, already one of the greatest voices in America. But what makes this part heavy is not just the glory. It is the price her private life made her carry from very early on. Aretha became a mother when she was still way too young. Britannica says she had her first 2 sons while she was still in her teens, then later had 2 more children. Her first marriage to Ted White began in 1961 when she was just 19, and later it was overshadowed by reports of domestic violence. People repeated older sources saying that marriage included times when Ted White would rough her up and leave bruises. The two separated in 1968. In 1978, she married Glyn Turman, but that marriage also ended in divorce in 1984. Put simply, Aretha's private life was never really peaceful, even when her career had already been at the top for a long time. The family tragedy hit even harder when her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, was shot in 1979, fell into a coma, and died in 1984. Through that whole stretch of life, Aretha still kept going, performed, still held a place in American music that was almost impossible to replace. And that is what makes her story so heavy. She did not live a neat life, but she stood strong long enough to turn all that bruising into power. In her final years, she battled a rare form of pancreatic cancer, pancreatic neuroendocrine cancer, and died in 2018 at 76. Then, even after her death, her family still got pulled into a long fight over handwritten wills that lasted for years. Number 12, John Lee Hooker as Street Slim. In The Blues Brothers, he plays Street Slim, the street musician singing Boom Boom on Maxwell Street. When the movie came out in 1980, Hooker was 63, already a true blues legend. Not some name that needed this movie to be remembered. He was born in 1917 into a sharecropper family in Mississippi, one of 11 children, then grew up under the musical influence of his stepfather, William Moore. Like a lot of bluesmen from the post-war era, Hooker got cheated by small-time producers who demanded exclusivity or did not pay him fairly. The Washington Post and Billboard both made it clear that he had to record under a whole bunch of different names just to get around those suffocating contracts and make a living. That is the kind of damage that is not loud, but it eats away at a whole life in music. His private life was not peaceful either. A Guardian obituary said that when he died, he was living with his 4th wife, Millie, and left behind 6 children from earlier marriages. What makes John Lee Hooker so admirable is that none of that crushed him. He made it through poverty, failed marriages, and a record industry full of tricks, and still lived long enough to be honored like a monument, from the NEA National Heritage Fellowship to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Hooker died in 2001 at 83 in his sleep at his home in California. Number 13, Donald Duck Dunn as himself, and the final name is Donald Duck Dunn, A man who was never loud, but this whole movie is almost standing on top of his bass playing. When the Blues Brothers came out in 1980, Dunn was 39, already a core part of the Stax sound and Booker T and the MGs for years. He grew up in Memphis, went to school with Steve Cropper, moved from the Royal Spades to the Marquis, then became the bassist for Booker T and the MGs around 1965. Put simply, Dunn did not walk into this movie as a film star. He walked in as a studio legend the general audience was finally getting a clear look at. Dunn's private life did not have the kind of loud drama some of the earlier names had. It was heavy in a quieter way. He married June Chalet in 1962, lived long enough to celebrate 50 years of marriage, and had 2 sons, Jeffrey and Michael. The biggest blow of his life came in 1983 when his son Michael died in a car accident. That is the detail that makes Dunn's story really hurt, because he was the kind of person people naturally picture as a steady, funny musician who never caused trouble. Even the way he ended up in the Blues Brothers feels very human. It was June herself who told him he should take the job when he was hesitant at first. In his later years, Dunn was pretty much semi-retired, living with his wife near their son in Sarasota, but he still kept performing. Then in May 2012, right after finishing shows at Blue Note Tokyo with Steve Cropper, he died in his sleep at 70. Looking back at the Blues Brothers, what stuns people is not just that it is a fun, wild, unbelievably cool movie. What makes it live forever is that everything in it feels like a moment that could never happen again. 2 crazy guys who came out of television, an R&B band packed with names that would each be legendary even on their own. Too many voices, too many personalities, too many huge souls all showing up in one movie right at a time when Hollywood still had enough nerve to let something that magical happen. That is why we are lucky this movie is still here for us to reopen, listen to again, and remember a time when American cinema still had that much fire. If this movie is tied to a special memory for you, tell the story in the comments. And if you love backstage stories like this too, subscribe to Weird Movie Secrets.